A social media post earlier this week by U.S. leader Donald Trump informed the Lee Jae-myung administration of a 25% hike in U.S. tariffs on South Korean products into the American market. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the response here at home and the possible reasons behind the post by Trump. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective for this Friday, January 30th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Top trade officials from South Korea in the U.S. actively seeking an understanding behind a unilateral decision by Donald Trump to raise U.S. tariffs on South Korean goods into the American market. For more on this, I have Celio Fioretti with French daily Croix here in the studio. Celio, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Professor Oh Joon-seok at Sookmyung Women's University live on the line. Professor Oh, it's good to have you with us.
Pleasure is mine.
Right, Celio, we shall start here in the studio. Let's begin with Mr. Trump's social media post earlier on Monday. What exactly did he say, and what have members of his administration been saying since then?
Well, this crazy week all started exactly on Monday by a social media post by President Donald Trump in which he accused South Korea of not living up to the trade deal reached last year in July. In that post, he announced a tariff on South Korean products raised from 15%, which then will reach to 25%, covering a broad range of products, automobiles, of course, pharmaceutical, lumber, and basically every Korean product, all reciprocal tariffs that are supposed to be in place. Trump argued that while the United States have moved quickly to lower its tariff, also it's kind of ironic because the U.S. tariff, were already close to zero from 2018. So he's living into his own world where he lowers tariff. He claimed that South Korea National Assembly has dragged its feet in approving the deal, and the message was blunt and consistent with his style, very sharp, and he threatened that if partners delay implementation of the deal, Washington will respond with economic pressure. Since then, members of the administration have taken a more measured take. U.S. officials have emphasized that tariffs are tied to implementation issues. It's not a breakdown of the alliance or the relationship between the two countries. There has been no indication that the deal itself is being scrapped, and the White House has left the door open for negotiation. But still, Monday here in Seoul, people were shocked that an ally country would do that to South Korea and break down the relationship in a really improvised manner not through an official diplomatic channel. On the South Korean side, the officials say they were not formally notified by the White House and have called for urgent consultation with the country. Seoul has confirmed that its industry minister is traveling now to Washington to negotiate with Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary in the U.S. And it really underscored that both sides are still engaged in negotiation, and we'll see how that goes along the next week.
Right. Professor, as Celio mentioned, Trump is finding fault with the Korean legislature for allegedly failing to promptly pass the Korea-U.S. trade deal. What are your thoughts? Do you believe the parliament here has been dragging its feet?
No doubt is government's decision and behavior should be based on legality, definitely. At least I know of Korea and the United States. But the legislative system is different. Korea has a statutory system, while the U.S. has case law. In conformity to the principle of a rule of law, not rule by man, in a statutory law system, public body cannot do without rule making. On the other hand, in a case law country like the United States, similar to a rule by doing, the revision and application process seems faster. So this is the difference between rule first principle versus doing first principle. The U.S. Supreme Court, which is reviewing the constitutionality of the reciprocal tariff already imposed by Trump administration, is likely to issue a ruling. It is the case of the United States. I don't think Korean Assembly has been dragging its feet. However, it is also true due to the difference of legislative processes, people on the U.S. side might expect a quick action plan. As a token of sincerity, it might be more desirable for a Korean government to explain proactively and show the schedule, and then try to a gesture of explaining in advance of increasing diplomatic tension regarding implementing process based on mutual understanding. Japan and Korea has both agreed a separate but somewhat similar trade framework deal with Washington last July. But in case of Tokyo, they implemented the agreement more quickly. It might be undesirable to expose to the risk of a backdraft held by Trump administration toward Korea's regulation on U.S. tech companies like Coupang continues to be a new issue, would be a trigger to escalate into a sudden trade conflict. Currently, the U.S. Foreign Minister Oh Joon-seok is scheduled to visit to the United States to engage in diplomatic efforts to clarify during future negotiation by presenting specific processing schedule.
Right. And as we speak, we have Korea's trade officials in the U.S. meeting with their counterparts there to address this latest tariff threat by Trump. You've touched upon this earlier as well, Celio. Could you tell us a bit more about the efforts from South Korea to address this particular issue?
Yeah, in response to President Trump's tariff threat, the Yi administration has moved quickly on several fronts, both politically and diplomatically, to contain the fallout and reassure Washington. So first, on the legislative side, which is the core of the problem, the ruling Democratic Party has made it clear its intent to fast-track the trade-related legislation that Trump is pointing to. Party officials say a so-called special act linked to the U.S.-Korea trade deal will be passed by the end of February. This bill would set up a state-run investment corporation that will manage the South Korea pledge investment into the U.S. It's a key element of the deal agreed last July. And 5 related bills are already now before the National Assembly. And the fact that both ruling party and the opposition party have introduced version of it is being interpreted as a way to speed things up. And secondly, the presidential office has also gone into crisis management mode, especially at the beginning of the week. It convened an emergency meeting to review Trump's announcement and reiterated that South Korea remains fully committed to implementing this deal, and at the same time, officials stressed that South Korea has not received formal notice from Washington, so they were not really prepared for such a week that we have seen. Finally, there's also a strong diplomatic push, as we just mentioned. The Finance Ministry has pledged to keep U.S. Informed of what South Korea is currently doing. The trade official of Korea, industry minister and the trade minister are in the U.S. and will be talking with U.S. authorities to finally find something quick and also to reassure as much as possible the industrial back then at home in South Korea that are now very worried for their potential loss if the tariff would hike to 25%.
Right, and while those efforts are underway, Professor Oh, there is also much speculation here over the possible reasons behind Mr. Trump's latest threat. What do you believe might have prompted this sudden shift in stance?
President Trump posted on his SNS that Korea National Assembly had not proceeded with legal procedure necessary to implement the trade agreement and another plan to raise tariff on Korean products, including automobile, from 15% to 25%. In response, Foreign Minister Jo-hyun said regarding President Trump's warning of reinstating a higher tariff of Korea if we proceed with our measures and explain them well to the U.S. side, it will be manageable. It's not enough. Legally interpreted expression is a due challenge. It's a rejection of current offer and another new offer. Even I had some experience in practice. The U.S. changes the decision-making structure, approaches, and the systems for announcing decisions were not something that I could understand. But I believe we have to take this post very seriously, although there is no need to weaken our position out of surprise. Unless Korea recognizes this reality, misunderstandings and miscalculations will continue to reoccur at the sacrifice of the national interest. My position is very apparent. To dismiss the speculation that delaying domestic procedure could be a viable strategy in anticipation of U.S. Supreme Court's ruling. Don't forget doing first principle. As Trump has a wide array of tools at his disposal to pressure Korea into implementing last year's agreement, even if the court were to rule against those tariffs, the U.S. could still impose retaliatory tariffs and other duties by selectively invoking another law, such as Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. To gain negotiation power, Korea has to take a deeper pause at this moment and longer stance of building up global collaborative partnership. For example, it is right time joining in the CPTPP, and DEPA could be a useful solution for increasing the trade negotiation capability for Korean government.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Celio, there are quite a number of people here who are linking this fallout to recent amendments to South Korea's Information Communications Network Act, which targets false information online. Could you tell us a bit about these amendments and why they might be a concern to the U.S.?
Yeah, the debate centers on this recent change and proposed amendment to South Korea Information and Communication Network Act and related digital regulation, which are designed to crack down on false information online and strengthen oversight of digital platforms. In practice, these amendments expand the government's ability to regulate online services, including a stricter obligation for platforms to manage the content they host, greater liability for misinformation, and tighter rules around data handling, network usage, and platform responsibilities overall. And Seoul argues that these measures are necessary to protect users, combat disinformation, and ensure a fair competition in an increasingly concentrated digital market dominated by few global players. However, from Washington perspective, these rules are increasingly some sort of digital regulatory barriers. That's how they frame it. U.S. officials worry that they disproportionately affect American big tech companies like Google, Amazon, YouTube, Microsoft, or Meta by imposing costs and constraints that domestic Korean companies either don't face or don't face to the same degree as them. And the concerns go beyond content moderation. The U.S. has repeatedly criticized South Korea policies on network usage fees, for example, restriction on exporting high-precision map data. That was an issue late last year with Google trying to have the access to Korea map data for Google Maps, for example. And also other security lock that Korea has to protect its sovereignty or sensitive information that American company want to access. And so this has created a lot of trouble between Korea and the US over maybe the last 2 decades already, and has not found any real solution for now. And that's why this amendment has become a bilateral issue between US and South Korea. US officials appear to be signaling that the digital regulation imposed by Korea is too much for them, and the frustration over Korea tech policies may have fed into President Trump's idea of raising the tariff again. This approach by Donald Trump could be somewhat similar maybe to a 19th century gunboat diplomacy. It means you force a country to change its law, to open its market for American companies, and you threaten them with a big gun. Today's world, it has changed. It's less violent, but still very efficient to threaten people with a tariff hike that would hurt their economy. Now the question is what answer Korea will respond to that. If we compare in recent events, for example, Europe choose to be more confrontational in the case of Greenland. It appeared to have worked so far. Trump retreated a bit on the Greenland front. Now it's to Korea's turn. Apparently the decision is to be more seeking a negotiation with the US and try to find a new deal. We'll see what approach is the best, but it's certainly difficult to handle the US and their demand these days.
Right. We'll probably have more information this weekend as our trade officials sit down with their counterparts in the US. Professor, going back to the amendments to the South Korean Act on Information Communication Network, speaking as a scholar, how do you respond to US concerns over the amendments to this particular act?
Mhm. When it comes to digital regulation, direction might be okay, but the timing might have much rooms to be developed. The amendment to the Information and Communications Network Act significantly strengthened penalties for the dissemination of false and manipulated information and holds platform operators responsible for deleting such information. However, the vague definition of false and manipulated information has drawn criticism for limiting freedom of expression, or it might be a violation under the rule of a fair competition in the market. The U.S. State Department expressed a serious concern regarding the bill, stating that it could negatively impact American online platform business, as Celio mentioned, Google or Coupang, undermine freedom of expression. The reason the U.S. is taking issue is primarily that American companies like Google and Meta could be regulated under it. It is called ring fencing, which is also considered to be a violation of national treatment principle of WTO. If the Trump administration takes a significant action in response to the concern raised by American companies, it could become a contentious issue not only between Korea and the United States, but also a global trade matter of WTO. The State Department expressed significant concerns over a recent past revision to a Korean law aimed at addressing false and fabricated online information, saying that it would negatively affect the U.S. online platform and undermine free expression. Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy, Sarah Rogers, also voiced concern over the revision in social media post in a public display of concern over the revision that struck worries about the possibility of a diplomatic trade tension between the two countries. The countries are committed to ensuring that U.S. companies are not discriminated against and do not face unnecessary barriers in terms of law and policies concerning digital services, including online platform regulations. In conclusion, timing is not that good, I think.
Right. Well, those amendments to the Act are poised to go into practice this coming summer. I suppose we'll talk more about it then. Celio, let's move forward. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to freeze its benchmark interest rate. Could you tell us a bit more about the reasons behind this particular decision, despite the political pressure?
Exactly. For now, the Fed is keeping its key lending rate in the 3.5 to 3.75% range, largely because U.S. economic activity continues to expand at what policymakers describe as a solid pace. Growth has surprised on the upside. Labor market appears to be stabilizing, and while job creation also has slowed, but unemployment has edged lower. At the same time, inflation remains above the Fed's 2% target, creating an ongoing tension between price stability and employment. And Fed Chair Jerome Powell made clear that the central bank is still assessing the impact of the 3 rate cuts delivered last year, with financial condition already looser and sign that the economy is regaining momentum. Policymakers judged that there was no urgency to move again at this meeting. In other words, the data gave the Fed enough confidence to pause and wait for a Chair's signal. The decision also, as you mentioned, come into a whole scandal and trouble that a really unusually charged political environment in the U.S. Powell used the moment to strongly defend the central bank independence, especially as he faced criticism from President Trump over and have a federal investigation targeting him over cost of a renovation of the central bank, and some criticism during his testimony. Powell has argued that the monetary policy must remain insulated from political pressure, especially from the White House, to preserve credibility and a long-term economic stability for the U.S. Despite these 2 dissenting votes in favor of an immediate cut, the broader message from the Fed is continuity of the current economy. Rates reduction may still come later this year, but only if inflation continues to cool and the labor market weakens further.
Right. Professor, as Celio mentioned, Mr. Trump has been very vocal about his support for lower interest rates. What are the risks and rewards, if you will, of lower interest rates by the Federal Reserve?
Precisely speaking, Trump has repeatedly urged Powell to cut the short-term interest rate that the central bank controls. In this sense, a short-term interest rate is a policy rate or reference rate. But long-term rates on things like mortgage, auto loans, and credit cards are largely set by market force, cannot be controlled by policy. And in recent weeks, fears that Trump's sweeping tariff could raise inflation, along with the administration's threat to the Fed's independence, have led markets to push those longer-term rates higher. It is not clear that the Fed can fully reverse those trends by itself. Simply speaking, risks would be ballooned inflationary pressure, which is getting harder to control. Reverse would be bust up and then start up the consumption in the market, igniting the economic cycle. If I were in the monetary policy making position, as Sunhee commented, that keep interest rate as it is. That is the best policy, I might say. The Fed typically reduces its rate during an economic downturn to encourage more borrowing and spending, and raising it to cool the economy and fight inflation when prices rise. President Donald Trump is badgering the Federal Reserve to cut interest rate, but even if the Fed gave in to the pressure, it wouldn't necessarily lead to lower borrowing costs for consumers. Trump's ongoing attack on Fed Chair Jerome Powell and his tariff policy could keep long-term interest rate at that matter for the consumers and business higher than they otherwise would be. In extreme case, a so-called the dichotomy of long-term and short-term bond market, which means long-term rate cannot be linked with short-term interest rate. A less independent Fed can lead over time to higher borrowing costs as investors worry that inflation may spike in the future, the fluctuation expanded, and then as a result, they demand higher yield to own treasury security, which might be a cause of another financial crisis.
I see, which is why the Federal Reserve for now is taking a cautious stance. All right, Professor, on that note, we'll end today's talk. As always, thank you so much for your insights today, Professor Oh.
The pleasure is mine.
And Celio here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and thoughts. Right, this ends this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.